Good morning. Hello. It's great to be back in Oslo. This was my very first international conference many years ago, and I always get a little bit of a thrill coming back. My name is Heather Downing, and I'm a total, absolute drone nerd, so I am biased in every way in this presentation. The good news for you is that this is supposed to be a fun one, but there's lots of information too. The reason that I wanted to talk about this is because really it's a flying computer, let's be honest. And I've gotten to play around with some APIs and I love just IoT in general. And I think there's a lot of things coming for us as software engineers to be able to get involved with really positive aspects of this industry. So in order to kind of lead into why I think it's a good thing, first we have to start off with some basics about what the regulations look like for civilian pilots versus others, and what is being done around privacy and tracking. And then, I promise I'll have no less than 10 videos of cool things for you, okay? Sound good? All right. But of course, I want to start the morning off right with a little video that I ended up creating while I was in the Faroe Islands. So that whole shot was done on a DJI Mini 3 Pro in gale force winds. We've come a long way in just basically 10 years. And the whole thing fit in my hand and it still was able to fly out that far. Crazy. So what I want to bring up to you is the concept of a technology called RemoteID. How many of you are familiar with that? None of you. Excellent. Fresh minds. Okay, so we're going to touch on that a little bit here. Think about it. I got permission, of course, because I'm a good, responsible drone pilot. But maybe that could have been a protected area that may have had a lot of birds nesting, and it wouldn't have been safe for me to fly, mostly because of disturbance. If I didn't know that I wasn't allowed to fly there, and the government didn't know who I was, that's a little bit of a problem, yes? So that has been the conundrum that many countries have really been wrestling with. And I'm going to go over what RemoteID is. It's a little nerdy, it's not too bad, just to kind of explain. Like I mentioned, it really hasn't been that long since drones first came on the scene for you and I to be able to just purchase. The very first commercial drone permit was issued by the Federal Aviation Authority in the United States in 2006. And very shortly after, the first agricultural drone was approved to be able to be used to spray on crops. And just a few years later, they had the bright idea that, well, if it can carry a payload of liquid to spray on crops, maybe it can carry a payload of other things, like maybe small amounts of water, etc., for search and rescue. So that has been going on now for about 9 years. Ooh, oh, no, hold on. I got it. And yes. And just a couple years later, we had over 1 million drones registered in the United States. That's registered, and you didn't have to register them. Then in 2019, which again wasn't that many years ago, Wing was the very first commercial drone delivery service that got approved. And by 2021, 1 in 10 Australians owned a drone. That's crazy. Just last year, the rules for remote ID were supposed to take effect, but it was very confusing about whether or not it could be implemented because it does require a little bit of a hardware change. And in June of last year, CASA, which is what Norway operates under, really needed to open, sorry, not CASA, you're next. In June of last year, Australia opened up their public consultation. They wanted to know what the public thought and if it was all right with them, if they were able to track a drone, and kind of like a license plate that you would have on your car. Just a couple months later, the FAA in the United States approved the company Zipline to fly something called BVLOS, which is Beyond Visual Line of Sight. Okay, that is particularly dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, or you're not aware of the atmospheric conditions like wind that can carry your drone away. But it was very crucial to be able to do so for lots of deliveries. And November of last year, that the UK finally opened a public request for information about that. And in March of this year, remote ID became active as a requirement within the US, the EU, and the UK and Australia will soon follow later on this year. So just in that time span, a lot has happened. So many of them have grown that I don't even have accurate numbers as to how many civilian drones there actually are in the sky, because before now, there really hasn't been a mandate for registration everywhere. It has pretty much only been certain select places, countries, only for maybe commercial operators, not necessarily civilian ones. So that's a lot of things to happen in a very short amount of time. And drones can do all kinds of things. Inspection drones are kind of the most fun one for me. Fun fact, just last year, I live in the middle of the US, where all the tornadoes are, in Kansas City. And I was gone at this conference, and I came back, and I was just flying my drone for fun to watch a harvesting across the street from me by a nice, amazing tractor, right? As I flew back, I noticed that there were shingles missing from the top of my roof. So I guess you'd say I was my own inspection person in that case. Took a picture, and they were out and said, "You're totally right. How did you even get these photos?" I'm like, well, just happened to be flying back in. But inspection drones are used all the time now, at least in the States and in Australia. Mapping drones are interesting because this is now an enormous tool that's being used in several countries to be able to accurately map out the current space of a particular property line and surveying land and topography. Delivery drones have been promised to us forever. They do exist now, and actually they're becoming quite popular in certain places. And of course, the thing that is near and dear to my heart, photography drones. That's the ones that you will probably interface with first, like the drone that I flew over the Faroe Islands. And of course, the most fun one, racing drones. You see this all over the internet, going really fast through crazy little spaces. It's a lot of fun, and they're all custom built, usually by hand. But these all are drones, even though they have completely different applications. They will all be affected by what remote ID is. So what is it? It's just a real-time identification and tracking that has to be emitted from your drone at a certain interval that your government gets to decide what that interval is. The reason they get to decide that interval is because they're the one with the infrastructure that's going to take it in. So it depends on how many drones you have flying around and how often they require it to be emitted. What happens if you bought a drone, like many of us, earlier? Back when they were a little bit bigger too. And they don't have a way to broadcast remote ID. It's just kind of like a beacon that's going out saying, I'm here, here is my information. You can track me just like a car with a license plate. Broadcast modules are add-ons that you can add onto any drone up to, of course, down to a certain size, because they will add weight. But if you don't have to, you're not going to have a problem flying your older drone as long as you have one of this. It can also be transmitted through an internet connection. It doesn't have to just be over cellular data. It can be over a small enclosed Wi-Fi connection, which can be done in like one of those racing drone courses. They can set up a whole Wi-Fi station for that there. This is the part that's actually relevant to being at a software conference. Message elements. So basically this kind of looks like JSON, and it has a payload in it that just talks about the drone ID, location, its altitude, speed, and the control station ID. The control station is the person that's controlling it. This is the control station. Well, mine looks a lot more fancy than my phone, but you could, in many cases, control it with your phone. This is the control station. And every so often, at certain intervals, it has to broadcast that. The biggest issue with civilians flying drones is not that they're necessarily bad at flying them, although that has definitely been the case for me for the first few years of my career. It's more that often law enforcement cannot tell friend from foe. And if they know that this is a certain model of drone, newly purchased, probably is somebody who doesn't know they're not supposed to fly there. They might handle it differently than a drone that has been seen multiple times near a prison or near an airport, and they know that maybe this is somebody who does know what they're doing, and they need to locate that operator. And now there are regulations in place, like we talked about now, in the EU and the US right now that require any drone that flies to have remote ID being broadcast. Does anybody here own a drone? A few of you? Cool. If you own an AUTEL drone, a DJI drone, they have a software update for you because they started allowing, putting that sensor hardware in it a few years ago as this started coming up. So if you haven't updated your drone in a while, today's the day to do that. So what does it really mean? There's a couple of different ways. This is a crudely drawing from one of our regulatory sites. I did not do it. But basically, it's just a real-time tracker. Okay? There's a couple of different ways that you can connect to it. There's a one-way control link, two-way control link that you can do. You can also have an interested observer who's not flying anything that can also capture all this. I'm also an airplane nerd, big surprise. And so at home, I have a device that also tracks any aircraft that's flying over my house and uploads it to Flight Radar 24. And in exchange, they give me a nice free subscription to Flight Radar 24, so I'm okay with that. And that kind of helps give everybody much more accurate tracking data of the speed of the plane and such, which becomes very important for investigations. Right now, you can also do the same thing with a drone, but the range is a lot shorter than what I can do with an airplane, because airplanes have transponders that go a lot farther as a radio signal than what your drone is going to do. And each drone will have a different signal strength as well to consider on top of just velocity. If you're going really fast in a different direction, you're just going to lose them right off your screen, okay? If you want to know the specifics about what it means to have to, integrate in your particular country, go to drone-remote-id.com. Really got to work on these URLs, people, and it'll give you a little bit more information. So the reason why this is important is because there's so many drones now, especially in my country. There's a lot in the States. I'm sure there's plenty in Norway. You guys are very open and have a gorgeous country. But in the States, they have a lot of people that own them. And unfortunately, we have military zones that they're just not supposed to go into, but you wouldn't know because a lot of our military zones are in the desert, or they're right next to a national park, or they're on the outskirts of a city. So that's where people are going to go to fly their drones, in these more rural locations, and they don't realize it. Air traffic control towers is another reason for the implementation of remote ID, because I'm sure there have been, not just in my country, but other places as well, reports of maybe a pilot having to take evasive action in a fixed-wing aircraft because there is a drone flying very close to their aircraft with people in it, and that's not ideal to have that be ingested into the engines, right? The other reason is drone delivering. There is no way that we're going to be able to actually have a really good drone delivery system unless each of the drones know about each other, kind of like in traffic. And how are they supposed to know about another drone unless they're all emitting something? Monitoring wildlife is another one that has seen a lot of adoption early. They were early adopters of remote ID because they could tell which drones belonged to the National Park Service versus people who are just flying it for fun. And so they could allow, basically, this is your allow list. This is the allow list of drones that are allowed to be in this area, right? And then, of course, bridge inspections. I recently came back from Sydney as well, and this is how they inspect the Sydney Harbour Bridge, is they do it with drones, because they don't want to stop a whole lot of traffic underneath, and so this is what they do. But they definitely don't want to shut down the drones that are authorized to be there. They want to shut down the drones that are not, and that's very important over Sydney. And of course, the biggest one is drones in search and rescue. So for a while, it's just a drone in the air. We had no idea what the ID was, meaning which one it was, who it belonged to, where it was in a specific rescue operation. So we don't know what we're looking at belonged to which person, which controller. And this is a good way to be able to triangulate places you've already covered per drone, because again, they emit that digital license plate. So, yes, you get enhanced situational awareness, prevention of collisions, quick incident response, and we can coexist with airplanes. Yay! So this all sounds great. A lot of people are not happy that now the drone is trackable. Why would that be? Why would that be an issue? Can anybody think about why that would be? Yes? Right. Yeah, there's no reconnaissance option for you because the military can see you. But even more than that, if you are building a site, an application, and you have a user come to it, what do you have the user first do? Authenticate. There's nothing for this. There is no authentication piece to this. It is completely showing your location and your information on top of where the drone is. That means if somebody is not very happy with a drone that they see that you're legally allowed to be where you are, but they just don't like it, they can also have a drone scanner app and find out where you are and be nice and angry to your face, and that's not very good. So every country now is going to interpret this data differently. Right now, it's just open. It's just like opening your browser and seeing all the JavaScript, right? It's the same. You get to see it all. And there's no selective encryption or anything. So that means that until each of the countries decide how much of the data is allowed to be exposed, it's all exposed. So that means that anytime you fly, people will be able to see you and see the drone. That also means that if there are there are a whole bunch of programs that also can do scans, and even if you haven't flown it for a week, that flight might have been captured in that area, and then they can come and talk to you about it later. So that's something that's never happened before now. And as somebody who, again, loves flying, I understand that you want to just feel free to do whatever you want, and once you're done with your flight, you just go away, and maybe you might have accidentally crossed into some place you weren't supposed to, but you're just done now. But now, everything you do can be tracked and recorded. So we have a little ways to go. But because RemoteID is now live as of this year, actually last quarter, a lot of really good things are going to come from it as well. So there are 2 types of RemoteID that you can check on. One of them is the direct broadcast that you do. The other one is the network RemoteID. Those are the 2 main types. The direct one is Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, and this is usually, you'll see this more in your cheaper drones. And it's mandatory to do broadcast data in the US and EU. You can also use cellular network data, but you have lovely mountains here, and for some reason, they get in the way. And so it's also going to be mandatory as a secondary, but in the meantime, it isn't. There are challenges. We are all technical here. You understand this. It's a limited broadcasting range. So even if somebody was, right outside their window, always scanning to see who in the world is flying a drone nearby, they may only see it as a blip on their screen for just a second, because you might be going so fast that the range just is not very good, especially on the smaller ones. So these are a couple of the aftermarket devices. These aftermarket devices are the sole reason why there was a delay in the United States for implementing RemoteID, because they couldn't build them fast enough. There was millions of people who wanted to be able to still fly their drone. A lot of them were professionals and just didn't want to have to buy another $15,000 drone that they were using for film and television, or to do roof inspections, or to do agricultural stuff. They wanted it right away. And so QPilot, and it was one of the companies that built one of these. This is an example of drone scanner, and this kind of shows you a little bit, I don't know if you can see it very well, maybe you'll be able to see it. This shows you a little bit of the payload that I was talking about. So you can go in and capture all of this, maybe render it to look a little bit nicer. You can triangulate and overlay it on a map. The reason I chose Drone Scanner is you can get it on GitHub because it's open source through the Open Drone ID program, which is really cool. What I liked about this too is that if you notice, there is different types, location analysis, but you can also decide to hide part of that data in your app. As a developer, you can decide that I don't really want to show where the operator is, but I will show where the drone is. Kitty Hawk is another one if you're interested in that. And looks like, yes. So there are some exemptions for very light drones, but not in Norway. So in Norway, if you live here, you're allowed to fly a drone that's under 250 grams if you get liability insurance. Yes. It's a lovely hobby. Everywhere I go, I have to learn each regulations that are current. But if I visit this country, I have to have a pilot's license, and I have to have RemoteID turned on, regardless of the size of my drone. The problem is that nobody just turns on RemoteID. It just broadcasts all the time. So you're probably going to broadcast it whether you have to or not, unless you have an older drone. All right, and if you're interested in that, we already talked a little bit about the different regulations. Cool. So right now, in the EU, they are granting waivers for beyond visual line of sight with RemoteID as well. And we're going to get into a little bit more of that. If you're interested in what the EU does for you guys, then that's going to be ESA. And this is their URL for that. And there's one for the UK if you want. All right. Next year, we're supposed to have autonomous air taxis commercially deployed in cities. I have seen it in person in New York. It's pretty cool. It's one of the busiest cities out there, and it's absolute nightmare to kind of get anywhere in a cab when you're trying to go to the airport. There are already helicopters there, but this is going to be an electric version, so it wouldn't take any petrol. And theoretically, it should be able to be autonomously steered. In 2030, it looks like the majority of these companies that are seeking the waivers are supposed to get them granted for beyond visual line of sight. 2035 is the drone swarms with AI that's deployed for surveillance and emergency response. I think it's hilarious that at the time, this was what was projected. This is the Gartner projection for drones as of last year. We already have that right now as of this year, a little early. So it is rapidly, like everything else, changing. There is an interesting case study, though, a white paper. I've spent a lot of time researching this. Scientists want to make better batteries and find new ways to get energy and to make drones smarter and keep them safe. So it's important that, oops, sorry, I keep doing that. I apologize. Come back. There we go. Okay. But limited battery is always the problem, whether it's a car or a drone, especially when it comes to trying to rely on them for anything really important, like search and rescue. So now some of the machine learning is being applied to adjusting the batteries based on the state of what it's doing. So if it's hovering, to not pull as much power depending on what it's doing. It's pretty cool, like some really interesting ways of adjusting to expand the battery life on top of just getting better batteries. The number one the number one owner of large drones in the US is actually monitoring for all of our energy plants, including solar, nuclear, wind, because there's just so much inspection to be done. It takes so long to do it by hand that this is the right way. And I'll tell you why. A lot of the drones now have different sensor technology that can be able to see all sorts of different spectrums of light and can tell heat signatures. They're also used for search and rescue. And that is probably one of the coolest things I've ever seen. I actually got to watch a wind farm being inspected, and they didn't do one drone to inspect it. They sent up one drone per. So I got to see a whole swarm of them go up one at the time, just one operator per drone in this huge field, and they all just kind of lined up next to each other in a row. It was awesome. And they got it done in so much less time that they said it's just not worth it to have to bring out a truck and a ladder and climb up there anymore. They've started doing this a lot in the UK because they just have had a hard time also getting labor that's willing to go out there. Okay, I don't know if you can hear that, maybe.
Dock. First things first, we have a weather station and a rain sensor built into the dock. This lets the remote pilot know if it's safe to take off. We can connect the remote controller to the dock for on-site debugging and maintenance. After landing, the driving rods are able to center the aircraft in the middle of the platform and allows the charging terminals to connect. The M30T dock version has 4 different sensors built into one payload: a laser rangefinder, optical zoom, a 640 by 512 thermal camera, and a wide sensor. When the dock closes, the motors will slowly spin so the cover itself catches the propellers and encloses them within the dock.
It's pretty cool. All right, let's see if I can actually get it to advance. Nope, doesn't want to do that. Let me, if I get this back. Come on. It looks like my laptop has frozen. Give me a second. No. Ah, okay, I got it. All right, Who's familiar with what a digital twin is? Yeah, you're on top of it. You know, just data capture, right? Trying to map out something that looks pretty close to the same. You know who first started doing digital twins? Museums. They're like, I want to know where everything was so I can remember where to put it back. I don't know. That it's just rapid 3D model creation. It's done a lot now, especially in new neighborhoods when they're building houses, and they'll have frequent updates as the houses are being built, so you can actually kind of see 3D the state of your house if you don't live where it's getting built. And it's a good way to inspect hazardous areas. It's also a good way to plan if you need to plan where you're going to maybe take a building down, etc. And it can cover a really large area, and it's really cheap.
This video was taken near the eye of a Category 4 hurricane in the middle of the Atlantic, with waves as high as a 4-story building and winds reaching 94 miles an hour. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration is sending 3 state-of-the-art drones, each with its own important mission, straight into the center of these monster storms.
The drones are a new piece of technology that is helping us uncover information about the storms that we didn't know before.
Let's take a look inside NOAA's lab to see how the agency uses drones to dive, sail, and fly into parts of a hurricane where humans could never go. At the laboratory, a team of NOAA engineers work on this torpedo-shaped drone called a glider. It's 5 feet long, can weigh up to 150 pounds, and it's controlled by drone pilots like Yuli Rivero.
A glider could cost anywhere from $175,000 to $200,000, depending on what sensors they're equipped with.
Those sensors are used to track storms half a mile beneath the ocean surface, measuring water temperatures along the way.
Beautiful.
This is not a handle. This is where you have the conductivity, depth, and temperature sensor in here, and this is the dissolved oxygen.
The unit can find the warmest sections of water, which can intensify hurricanes.
Normally we dive to 900 meters, and it takes about 4 hours. So it's about 6 dives per day.
The drones collect data underwater and send it to computers like this using satellite radio waves.
So one of the things we want to know is when the glider goes into the water, if you look here, this is the actual track of what the glider did, and you see this is like almost a perfect V shape, which is what we strive for.
When the drones surface after each dive, they transmit their location to Yuli's computer, which shows up as those little dots between the lines.
So here is a map of where our gliders are right now. So we have gliders south of Puerto Rico, these 3 gliders right here, one south of the Dominican Republic, and one north of Puerto Rico.
While gliders take measurements underwater, sail drones track what's happening on the ocean's surface.
They want to get the sail drone to be at the same location as the glider. This way you have information from the surface down, and then also, atmospheric information, because the sail drones have the capability of doing that.
Built for extreme conditions, the robots are 23 feet long with a 15-foot wing that powers the drone, and solar panels that power the sensors. These sensors test surface level temperature, wave height, wind speed, and salinity, or how fresh the water is.
And if they are fresh, we know that they will remain in the surface.
And if that water is also warm, it indicates a site that could intensify a hurricane.
It's pretty cool. Did you know that drones don't just fly? I had no idea, but the drone operators, pilots, right, piloted all 3 kinds for that. Norway is also doing a lot in the atmospheric areas. So did you know that you've got, as of, early June, that you're going to have, Meteo Drones is the name, from Meteomatics. They're going to work with the Norwegian Research Center, so NORS, to install 30 of its autonomous weather drones. And they go pretty high. These drones go up to 6,100 meters. in the sky above the surface to kind of close a significant meteorological gap in the lower and mid-atmosphere. So you have satellite data, you've got some ground station data, but there is this gap in the middle that is where a lot of the trouble starts, and it's hard to get it. And so this is something that's actually going to be deployed in your country. It looks much cooler in this picture, I think. But yeah, so it's a 6-rotor unmanned aerial vehicle, and it conducts weather prediction and observations. It would be at around 20,000 feet to me, and it's well below most existing satellites and radar and planes. So unlike a weather balloon, which is at the mercy of the wind currents, it can actually stay where it's at and still take sensor data. And so it's much more accurate in that aspect. And the weather balloons cannot return to the launch site, but this can. It also can monitor its own battery life and can send out a signal that it needs to either go back down for a tether or you need to send another one up. And then the data is streamed to Euro 1K, which is Mediomatic's high-resolution weather model, and then it's handed over to Norse. Ooh. Pretty cool. There's so many cool things that are happening. We've also got aerial LiDAR. I'm assuming you're familiar with LiDAR. They're pretty affordable and widely available. And now putting LiDAR sensors in drones can also allow for even more detailed 3D mapping. Also, this is not a joke. There is tech that is coming out called LPT, which is laser power transfer. It's been proven that, yes, you can charge your drone by shooting a laser at it, just maybe not the laser that you're familiar with. And basically, in this charging method, the laser diodes of different wavelengths are used to deliver power to the PV cells that are integrated on the drones. These PV cells harvest energy from the laser beams to charge the batteries or directly deliver the required power if the batteries are dead. So LPT is considered pretty promising. It can deliver really high energy in a burst in a short amount of time. But of course, it has some challenges as it's growing, but it's still really cool. I never thought you'd be able to just shoot a laser at a drone and it would get to have an increased battery life. But here we are in the future. This thing's also pretty cool. This is the world's fastest multi-rotor UAS, which is helpful if you're trying to get somewhere really quickly when it comes to search and rescue or even just with delivering. This is called Wave Aerospace Huntress, and it's well named. It's a hybrid electric and fuel rotor. It lets it go fast. It also can lift 50 plus kilograms, which is about 110 pounds, depending on the fuel load. And it is capable of Mach 0.4. That's pretty crazy. And just in April this year, the very first drone delivery was completed on Mount Everest. And this particular drone was one that DJI did create that was meant to be a delivery drone, but it was specially engineered to be able to handle high altitude and additional battery packs on it. After its flight, it actually used a winch system and picked up some of the trash that was left at the base camp up on Everest that we often see pictures of. And so we're hopeful, because it is so dangerous for people to go up there, we're hopeful that this is actually going to be the beginning of being able to clean that up safely without people losing their lives. DJI's Flycart 30 is what did this, and it has a maximum capacity about 15 kilograms. So not as much as Huntress. It also costs way less than Huntress. And the drone was able to do it in extreme cold, wind, everything.
珠峰的物资运输和垃圾清理问题，都是依靠登山队员往返昆布冰川，每年都会存在一定的伤亡。FG30可以通过空中运输的方式，有效降低人员往返的能力，提升安全感。在 C 营地可能交流点不太好找，可以进行一键锁降，自动释放货物，从而达到货物的快速送达。OK， 回来了。
一键返航，简不简单？
今天是在珠峰大本营往 C 营地运氧气瓶，然后呢再把一些垃圾给带回来。未来我们针对珠峰这个场景进行一个常规化的运行，贡献出自己一份力量，然后能让我们的运输过程中更加的安全高效。
Pretty cool. Now, let's talk about something you're doing here. So, again, Norway is always ahead of the curve, right? So, you started a project down in Stavanger. I hope I said that right. Niall would kill me. So in Stavanger, using drones to be used for emergency medical uses. And it actually started in 2022 and will continue until next year. And Stavanger was selected as a test area for this particular project as an example test bed for the EU to see how useful this will be. In recent years, drones have often been associated with war a lot, and I'm just going to encourage you to think that there are really positive ways it can also be used, just like anything else. And actually, in Stavanger last year, a drone delivered a cardiac pacemaker to a remote location that was difficult to get to. And also at the same time in Kassel, Germany, a drone delivered a tissue sample from an operating room to a laboratory in Helsinki. And then an EpiPen was flown from the mainland to an island in a very short amount of time because it just wasn't possible any other way. So there's a lot that is happening right here in Scandinavia.
Citizens could be helped much faster and, frankly, live better lives.
In this special case, I think the main focus is on time. Time we can use for the operation, the patient, and time which we don't lose anymore on transportation. Therefore, the drones are a very important tool to get a better health care in the region.
It's very important for a city to be involved in such innovative EU projects. Without AMO, it would have taken much more time to push the drone topic forward internally. Inspired by the work and learnings from AMR, we are now into development of drafting and testing our own aspirations for Helsinki Youth-based digital twin.
We, the AMO consortium, are extremely happy about how our recommendations and findings have been received by the municipalities, cities, regions and their subsidiaries. Also, the discussion and the cooperation with emergency medical services professionals and domain has been extremely fruitful and rewarding. A lot has been achieved, a lot remains to be done in upcoming years, but we've been able to establish that there's a widespread consensus that unmanned aviation and these systems will be bringing a lot of added value to the emergency and medical services.
I would like to have seen this implemented yesterday, because I can already, looking at a demonstration today, could have look back at different cases and realize that if we'd had these opportunities, we would have applied them.
So, I think that there is a lot more room to grow, and I've got to tell you how many more listings I see for software developers in this field. They're really interested, especially if you do a lot of data, they want you to come and help work on these kinds of systems. And it's something that traditionally isn't usually looked at by college students and such, so you have an opportunity to see how this can grow. I don't know if you could see it in the background of that video, but they also had unmanned aerial vehicle that could transport a patient by themselves. And they've already tested that out here in Norway. It's pretty cool. And I just want to remind you that there's lots of headlines in media, but I, for one, am very excited about how things have gone, because I think now we actually have the tracking ability to do this responsibly and properly. And let's be honest, drones are here to stay, so get involved with the really good side of it. And thank you for listening to me today. If you're interested at all in getting any of these connections, find me afterwards. Thank you.